In one brutal minute, George Foreman watched his undefeated boxing record crumble in Zaire, Africa. Yet decades later, this same man would sell over 100 million cooking grills bearing his name. How does a feared heavyweight champion transform into America's favorite pitchman? Today, we'll explore how Foreman found salvation in boxing, lost everything, and reinvented himself as a business icon. Don't forget to download our cultural glossary for context. Chapter 1: The Golden Beginning. Long before George Foreman became a household name, he was just a kid from Marshall, Texas, searching for direction in a world that seemed to offer him none. Born on January 10, 1949, in Marshall, Texas, George moved to Houston's Fifth Ward neighborhood as a young boy. His early years were marked by restlessness and a search for identity. Though his childhood presented challenges, what transformed George's trajectory was his decision to join the Job Corps at age 16. The Job Corps program, a government initiative aimed at helping disadvantaged youth learn vocational skills, became Foreman's salvation. It was there, in Pleasanton, California, that he first encountered boxing, a sport that would eventually define his life. His natural athleticism quickly became apparent. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches tall with massive hands that seemed designed for punching, Foreman's imposing physique complemented his raw talent. His Job Corps supervisors recognized his potential and steered him toward formal training. Foreman had a reputation for street fights as a teen. At Job Corps, a supervisor suggested he try boxing where he might earn medals instead of trouble. The transformation was swift and remarkable. Within just 2 years of taking up boxing, Foreman qualified for the 1968 U.S. Olympic team, a meteoric rise that stunned the boxing establishment. In Mexico City, facing Soviet Union's Jonas Cepulis in the gold medal match, Foreman dominated with brutal efficiency, securing the Olympic heavyweight gold medal. As he circled the ring waving a small American flag after his victory, Foreman established himself not just as a boxing champion, but as an American sports hero. That moment of patriotic pride, broadcast to millions, marked his entry into public consciousness. Years later, reflecting on his journey from Houston's Fifth Ward, Foreman said, "Left Houston's Fifth Ward. All I wanted to return with is 1K, but here is how I returned." The simple boy with modest dreams would return as a champion. The directionless youth from Texas had found his calling, transforming Olympic gold into the foundation for what would become one of the most storied careers in boxing history. Chapter 2: The Fearsome Champion. With Olympic gold around his neck, Foreman stood at the threshold of professional boxing, a world that would soon learn to fear his devastating power. Foreman turned professional in 1969, and what followed was nothing short of a reign of terror in the heavyweight division. Foreman's fighting style was the antithesis of grace. He was all raw power and intimidation. While other boxers danced, Foreman stalked. Where others jabbed strategically, he threw sledgehammers. His fights rarely required judges' scorecards. 13 of his first 15 opponents fell by knockout. In his later years, Foreman would maintain his reputation with characteristic humor, saying, "I'm still the meanest, toughest, hard-hitterest hombre this side of the Mississippi." This bravado, which once struck fear into opponents, had transformed into a charming persona that endeared him to fans. Boxing analysts noted something distinct about Foreman's ring presence: an impassive, almost eerie calmness that preceded violent explosions of power. Unlike the charismatic Muhammad Ali or the tenacious Joe Frazier, Foreman was taciturn and businesslike. He didn't need to talk. His fists communicated with devastating eloquence. By 1973, with an undefeated record of 37-0 with 34 knockouts, Foreman earned a shot at the heavyweight championship of the world. The champion, Joe Frazier, was himself undefeated and had previously beaten Muhammad Ali in the fight of the century. On January 22, 1973, in Kingston, Jamaica, Foreman and Frazier met for the world title. What boxing experts predicted would be a competitive clash turned into an astonishing display of dominance. "Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!" exclaimed broadcaster Howard Cosell in what became one of sport's most famous calls. Foreman knocked Frazier down 6 times in 2 rounds. The boxing world was stunned by the ease with which Foreman dismantled the previously unbeatable champion. At age 24, George Foreman had reached the pinnacle of boxing, becoming the most feared heavyweight on the planet. His aura of invincibility seemed complete. Defending his title twice with quick knockouts, Foreman appeared unstoppable, a force of nature rather than merely a boxer. As his acclaim grew, so did his bank account. Endorsement deals rolled in, and Foreman began enjoying the material trappings of success: fancy cars, expensive clothes, and a growing entourage. He was on top of the world, with no reason to believe his reign would ever end. The Olympic gold medalist had fulfilled his promise, transforming himself from an amateur prospect into the most intimidating heavyweight champion in boxing history. But his greatest challenge awaited him in the humid heat of Africa. Chapter 3: Defeat and Redemption. In boxing, invincibility is always an illusion, and for George Foreman, that illusion was about to be shattered in the unlikely setting of Kinshasa, Zaire, now Democratic Republic of Congo. The year was 1974, and Muhammad Ali, the former champion who had been stripped of his title years earlier for refusing military induction, had fought his way back to a title shot. Few gave the aging Ali a chance against the younger, stronger Foreman. Odd makers installed Foreman as a 7-1 favorite. The fight, promoted as the Rumble in the Jungle, became a landmark sporting event. For Foreman, it represented not just a defense of his title, but validation of his dominance. The entire world watched as the two men stepped into the ring on October 30th, 1974. What transformed that night would alter boxing history and fundamentally change George Foreman. Ali employed what became known as the rope-a-dope strategy, leaning against the ropes, covering up, and allowing Foreman to punch himself into exhaustion in the tropical heat. By the 8th round, Foreman's arms felt like lead. Ali, who had been taunting him throughout, suddenly sprung forward with a combination that sent the exhausted champion crashing to the canvas. Foreman, who had never been knocked down before, couldn't beat the count. The knockout came as a complete shock to Foreman. Having dominated the fight in his mind, he found himself suddenly on the canvas, disoriented and unable to comprehend how his undefeated record had just ended. The defeat devastated Foreman. His identity had been built around being unbeatable, and now that foundation was gone. He fought on, but lost again in 1977 to Jimmy Young. After that fight, exhausted and dehydrated in his dressing room, Foreman experienced what he describes as a religious epiphany. In the dressing room, after the Young fight, exhausted and dehydrated, Foreman experienced a spiritual crisis. "I felt like I was dying," he said. This moment led to a religious awakening that redirected his life. This spiritual awakening led to Foreman's first retirement from boxing. He became an ordained minister and opened a youth center in Houston, dedicating himself to helping children find direction through sports and education, the very things that had saved him. The invincible champion had been humbled in the ring, but in that defeat, he found something more valuable than any championship belt: a purpose beyond himself and a faith that would guide the rest of his life. Chapter 4: The Comeback King. Just when the world thought George Foreman's story was complete, the boxer turned preacher living quietly in Texas, he stunned everyone by announcing his return to the ring at 38, after a decade-long absence. When Foreman announced his comeback in 1987, most boxing commentators scoffed. He was overweight, slow, and seemingly past his prime. The fierce scowl that had once intimidated opponents was replaced by a genial smile. Yet beneath the new, friendlier exterior beat the heart of a competitor who still believed he could reclaim heavyweight glory. What made Foreman's comeback remarkable wasn't just his age, but his complete transformation. The once surly champion now joked with reporters, hugged opponents, and openly discussed his love of cheeseburgers. This new George Foreman, affable, self-deprecating, and relatable, connected with the public in ways his younger, intimidating self never could. Fighting his way through contenders despite his advanced age, Foreman kept winning, though rarely with the devastating knockouts of his youth. His persistence paid off on November 5, 1994, when he faced Michael Moorer for the heavyweight championship. At 45, Foreman was given little chance against the younger champion. For 9 rounds, Moorer outboxed the aging challenger. Then, in the 10th round, Foreman landed a straight right hand that sent Moorer crashing to the canvas. Against all odds, George Foreman had reclaimed the heavyweight championship he had lost to Muhammad Ali 2 decades earlier. It happened! It happened! Foreman exclaimed in disbelief as he sank to his knees in prayer. At 45 years and 299 days, Foreman became the oldest heavyweight champion in history, a record that still stands. The accomplishment transcended sports, becoming a cultural touchstone about perseverance and late-life achievement. Suddenly, George Foreman was everywhere, on talk shows, in commercials, and in the living rooms of Americans who had never watched a boxing match. His comeback resonated particularly with middle-aged Americans who saw in Foreman a vindication of their own potential. If a 45-year-old overweight preacher could become heavyweight champion, what limitations were really real? Looking back on his extraordinary boxing career that spanned decades, Foreman humbly said, "I dabbled into a few generations of boxing, won some, couldn't beat Ali in the 70s, came back and won the title, but couldn't beat Holyfield in the 90s. But so proud to have rubbed shoulders with great men." After successfully defending his title and eventually retiring for good in 1997 with a professional record of 76 wins, 68 by knockout, and 5 losses, Foreman had cemented his place as one of boxing's greatest comeback stories. The minister who returned to boxing as a novelty had defied all expectations, reclaiming the title that defined him and, in the process, winning the hearts of Americans who recognized in his journey their own hopes for second acts. Chapter 5: The 5 Georges. Behind the public persona of boxer and businessman, George Foreman built something he considered far more important: a large, close-knit family with a naming convention that raised eyebrows and reflected his deepest values. One of the most distinctive aspects of Foreman's personal life is that he named all 5 of his sons George Edward Foreman. While this decision often elicits chuckles, Foreman's explanation reveals the depth of his thinking. Foreman's decision to name all 5 sons George Edward Foreman reflected his philosophy about family unity. He believed this shared identity would reinforce that their fates were connected. Success for one meant success for all. His sons, known as George II, George III, George IV, George V, and George VI, or by their nicknames Monk, Big Wheel, Red, Joe, and Little Joey, grew up understanding they were part of something larger than themselves. This unconventional naming approach reflected Foreman's emphasis on family unity and shared identity. Foreman's daughters, Michi, Frida, Natalia, Leola, and Georgetta, received their own unique names, though Georgetta's name maintains the family connection. Frida briefly followed her father into professional boxing, with Foreman reluctantly supporting her choice while making clear his reservations about women's boxing. As a father, Foreman brought the same intensity to parenting that he once brought to boxing. He emphasized education, discipline, and spirituality, while also showing a playful side rarely seen during his fearsome younger years. Family gatherings at the Foreman house in Marshall, Texas, typically revolve around two things: faith and food. Sunday dinners after church became legendary affairs, with Foreman often cooking on the very grills that bear his name. The best way to know a family around the dinner table, Foreman often says, that's where the stories are told. That's where the love is formed. With characteristic humor about his transformation from lean fighter to family man, Foreman once said, "Had fresh berries with oatmeal today. Only guy down to his fighting weight and wife say you need to lose some pounds, ha ha." This self-deprecating style endeared him to fans who appreciated his authenticity. The man who once stood alone in the ring found his greatest joy in the chaotic, loving environment of a large family, all sharing not just his name, but the values of unity and perseverance that defined his remarkable life. Chapter 6: Grill Master. While George Foreman's boxing achievement secured his place in sports history, it was a countertop cooking appliance that would make him truly wealthy and introduce him to a generation who never saw him throw a punch. In 1994, as Foreman was completing his improbable boxing comeback, he was approached to become the spokesperson for a new kitchen appliance, a portable grill designed to cook meat with lower fat content by draining away grease. Initially skeptical, Foreman was won over after trying the product. "They gave me the grill, and I didn't want it," Foreman recalled, "but my wife cooked a burger on it, and the fat rolled off, and it was the best burger I'd ever tasted." What began as a simple endorsement deal evolved into one of the most successful product partnerships in history. The George Foreman Lean Mean Fat Reducing Grilling Machine, better known simply as the George Foreman Grill, became a cultural phenomenon and marketing triumph. Foreman's sincere, straightforward pitching style resonated with consumers. Unlike typical celebrity endorsements, Foreman spoke about the grill with genuine enthusiasm, often sharing how he used it to feed his large family. His authenticity, combined with an affordable price point and actual product effectiveness, created a perfect storm in the consumer marketplace. By 2009, over 100 million George Foreman grills had been sold worldwide. The financial arrangements proved even more remarkable than the sales figures. Initially paid for his name and face on the product, Foreman later negotiated for ownership stake. In 1999, he sold his rights to the grill for $138 million, far more than he ever earned in the boxing ring. Beyond the grill, Foreman expanded his business empire to include clothing lines, cleaning products, and a series of books. He became a regular on TV shopping networks and cultivated the image of a friendly, trustworthy entrepreneur, the absolute opposite of his once intimidating boxing persona. Foreman approached his business ventures with the same determination he showed in boxing. His focus wasn't on when to stop working, but on providing generously for his family's future. The feared puncher who once knocked out opponents in seconds had transformed himself into America's friendly pitchman, proving his greatest talent might not have been his punching power, but his ability to connect with ordinary people. Chapter 7: A Legacy Forged. Few American figures have reinvented themselves as completely or successfully as George Foreman. From fearsome champion to beloved businessman, creating a legacy that transcends both sports and commerce. Foreman's influence on boxing remains significant. He is regularly ranked among the hardest punchers in heavyweight history. His fights with Ali, Frazier, and others defined an era considered boxing's last golden age. His improbable comeback and championship win at 45 rewrote what seemed possible in sports. Yet it's perhaps in business where Foreman's impact had been most revolutionary. He pioneered a new model of celebrity endorsement, one based on authentic connection rather than mere fame. Before Foreman, athletes typically just appeared in commercials. After him, they became brand partners and entrepreneurs. "I don't mind if you call me Champ or George, or even George Foreman," he once said, "just as long as you call me." This type of humor exemplified how thoroughly Foreman transformed his public image. The scowling, intimidating fighter became the grandfatherly figure who sold grills with a smile. This transformation didn't just make Foreman wealthy, it created a template for athletes seeking post-career opportunities. When George Foreman passed away on March 21, 2025, tributes poured in from the boxing world, business leaders, everyday fans who had never seen him fight, and young entrepreneurs who studied his marketing approach. His life had touched Americans across multiple generations and in vastly different ways. His youth center in Houston continues to serve children following the same principle that served Foreman himself, that sports can provide direction and discipline to those who need it most. The center stands as a concrete manifestation of his belief in giving back and creating opportunities. The troubled youth who found salvation in boxing gloves transformed himself repeatedly throughout life, from Olympic champion to heavyweight king, from minister to comeback story, and finally to an entrepreneurial icon whose name became synonymous with American innovation and reinvention. Want more incredible stories that teach English and inspire? Subscribe to Good English Now and watch our next video.